This video is sponsored by Synchron Pianos by Vienna Symphonic Library.
Most piano players and guitarists will know their major chords, their minor chords, sevenths, possibly diminished and augmented as well. But one category of chord that they may avoid learning, one that they may be intimidated by, is the upper chord extensions, which refers to ninths, 11ths and 13ths, and all the variations thereof where we modify the notes in those chords. Upper chord extensions though offer such a rich sound, a rich quality to them, that you can't get with typical 3 or 4 note harmony. So today I want to get you into the world of upper chord extensions by addressing the 2 factors that I think make upper chord extensions intimidating to new players. The first factor is knowing what notes actually go into these chords. How do you actually voice these 5, 6 or 7 note chords on your instrument? And the second factor is knowing when to play them. How do you actually know when to play a G13 chord or an F sharp 11 chord? Where do they fit into typical chord progressions? So let's start by looking at that first factor, how to actually voice these chords. And to do this, we're going to use a little trick that we can call the slash chord trick. So for example, that is what I would call a G dominant 13 chord, or just G13 if you want to. But if we look at the notes I'm actually playing, I'm really playing an F major 7 in the right hand and then G in the left hand. So we could call that F major 7 slash G, right? Because that's what a slash chord is. Saying play that chord in the right hand and then play that left hand bass note underneath it. But how does this create a G13 chord? Well, let's lose that lower octave. If we look at it like this, we see that we're missing the 3rd and the 5th. But once we reintroduce them, we have that fully stacked G13 chord. Just like any other tertiary harmony, it's all about stacking thirds. And if we're looking at the white notes, all we have to do to think about thirds is play a note, skip a note, 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 and we get the fully stacked G13 chord. But when we have this fully stacked version, we hear it sounds pretty dense, right? So in practice, musicians will typically drop the 5th from the chord, and often as well, the 3rd, which turns a big old stack of notes into something far more easy on the ears and easy to understand, because I don't have to now think G13, I can think F major 7 over G. And that can extend to when we are making modifications to the chord, alterations. So imagine we have this chord. Pretty cool chord, right? Especially if we resolve it back to C. That is a F minor major 7 over G, but it's actually a G13 flat 9. There's the flat 9. The ninth should normally be A, but I've lowered it down to A flat. So every upper chord extension chord you could have, every 9th chord, 11th chord, 13th chord can be simplified down to a simple slash chord, which makes it so much easier to understand, because all you have to do is think, I'm going to play that chord in the right hand and that note in the left hand. And I don't even need to be aware that I'm playing a 13 chord. I can just think slash chord. And you can extend that to guitar as well. The guitarist could play that chord and the bass player could play that. And between them, they've got that G13 flat 9 chord. So I can't go through every upper chord extension and its slash chord trick, but I put them on screen right now. And let's go through just another one example of how we can use slash chords to effectively cheat our way into playing upper chord extensions. So let's look at the dominant 9 chord. So C dominant 9 is the same as C7, a chord that I'm sure we're all familiar with, but we add the 9th degree. That would be the 8th degree, the octave, 8th, right? So one note up from the octave is the 9th degree. So that is C7 with the 9th on top, which is a C9 chord, or what would the full name of that chord would be C dominant 9. So that's a C dominant 9 chord, and we could play it like this, that I'm playing it now, but a better way to think about it would be we have a E minor 7 flat 5, which is this chord, in the right hand, and the note C in the left hand. The thing is, although you could play a C dominant 9 chord just about with one hand, these upper chord extensions by definition go beyond the octave. That's why they're called upper chord extensions, because they're going up beyond the octave, the 9, the 11, the 13. So generally we're not going to be able to play it with one hand, so we may as well split the chord across two hands, and when we do that we don't have to now play it here. We can free up the root note to go somewhere else on the piano, which I think gives us a far more interesting broad tone than that. So that's how we should think about upper chord extensions. We should think about it not as one big chord, but as one chord over a different bass note. You can do that with every type of upper chord extension.
The piano sound you've been hearing throughout this video so far isn't the internal sound of my keyboard, but instead the Yamaha CFX, one of the 9 beautifully sampled pianos available in the Synchron Piano bundle by Vienna Symphonic Library. These pianos are genuinely the most realistic VST virtual pianos I've ever worked with, and they're my go-to choice when recording piano. If you're interested, you can try all 9 of these pianos out with a demo license, and right now you can get 35% off plus another 10% using the promo code down below. You can also get Vienna's Soft Imperial piano completely free as well, so do follow the links down below and check out these fantastic instruments.
So the first thing we can do to make upper chord extensions less intimidating is to latch onto our existing knowledge of chords. Like we already know F major 7, and all we have to do to think about a G13 chord now is think F major 7 over G. We can use our existing knowledge to get into this new world of chords, make them less intimidating. So that's the first thing we can do, but the second thing we can do is have a better awareness of where and when these chords can and should be used. Of course, there's no strict hard and fast rule on when and where a chord should be used, but there's certain environments, certain contexts where you're more likely to see some of these 9, 11 and 13 chords. So let's start by talking about dominant chords. So I'm sure you're familiar with this chord. That's G7, right? But the full name of that chord is G dominant 7. We just shorten it to G7 for sort of convenience, in the same way that we shorten C major down to C. Now the reason it's called dominant 7 is because diatonically it's built on the 5th degree. So anything labelled dominant is to do with the 5th degree of the scale. So in C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th degree is G. That's the dominant degree of C major. So if we build a 7th chord just by stacking up thirds from this chord, from this note, we naturally arrive at this chord, dominant 7, G dominant 7. So the only place we can play a dominant chord diatonically in the key is on the 5th degree of the scale, and that refers to dominant 7, it refers to dominant 9, to dominant 11 and dominant 13. So the easiest way to think about where to use a G11 chord, for example, is it will be the 5th chord of the key. So G is the 5th chord of C. So if I'm going to play a G11 chord, it's going to want to resolve back to C, right? And that applies even if we make alterations to the chord. So if I play this chord, which is G11 flat 9, but it's flat 9 here, it's still acting as a dominant chord. So it still wants to resolve back to 1. Now, of course, like I just said, that's just a guideline. You can use dominant chords in all sorts of places, and a style of music which kind of puts dominant chords on everything is the blues. So we all know in the blues, it's really typical to put a dominant chord on the 1, the 4, and the 5 on everything. So this is another place where we could use an upper chord extension. And a particularly nice upper chord extension to use in the blues is the dominant 9 chord. It's a bit like we're upgrading our usual 7 to 9. So in the typical 12-bar blues, we would use a C7, we'd use an F7, and we use a G7, right? We could swap all 3 of those out for their 9th equivalents. So now I'm going to use C9, where I would have used C7. See, there's my 9th there. And I could use F9 instead of F7. So the 9 was there, the G, right? And then I'm going to go to G9, which is that chord, 9th's there. F9, and back to C9. So that's what we can do with some of the dominant upper chord extensions. But what about some of the other ones, like the major or the minors? What about a major 9th chord or a minor 9th chord? Well, in a similar way that we were just looking there in the blues, where you can treat the 9th as an upgraded version of the 7th, that does pretty much extend over to major 9ths and minor 9ths. So if we were having a chord progression that had a C major 7, like this, imagine we had C major 7, moving to F major 7. I could upgrade both of those major 7s into major 9ths. So I'm going to have C major 9 and A major 9. And you can hear we get that same lush quality that we got with the major 7, but just upgraded to an extra level of lushness. We've got that extra note in there to add an extra dimension to the harmony. And of course, like we were talking about in part 1 of this video, I don't have to think C major 9. I can think in terms of slash chord, right? What chord is my right hand playing there? It's an E minor 7 chord. E minor 7 over C is a C major 9 chord. The same applies to minor chords. If I had a D minor 7, moving to G minor 7, I could upgrade those 7s to 9ths. Each variation of the upper chord extensions have their own character, and one that has a particularly tricky character is the major 11th chord. So a C major 11th chord would be C major 7 with both the 9th and the 11th thrown in. And particularly when voiced a bit lower, it has quite a hazy sort of dissonant sound to it. And that's because not only have we got the rub between the 11th and the 3rd, but we've also now got this tritone between the B and the F. So it's got a lot of dissonance in it. But a really clean and fantastic way to sort of sort that sound out is to sharpen the F up to F sharp. That's what we can call a sharp 11 chord, or the full name of it would be C major 9 add sharp 11. And that has that really curious sound where we've cleaned up the dissonance of the tritone, because now we have a perfect fifth. We've sort of minimized the dissonance that we had here, because E and F has now become E and F sharp. And on top of that, we're now introducing this lovely sharp 4 kind of Lydian note to the tonality. Now, a great place to use this, I think, a sort of very cheap, easy way to use it, but very effective, is at the end of a song. So imagine you were going to end the song on a C chord. You're going to end on C like that. What you can do to win some jazz brownie points is add that sharp 11 in just there at the end. And then you really don't have to worry about whether it's going to clash with anything else. You'll just get to use that beautiful, brilliant Lydian sound at the end of your piece.